Nobody told me to stop. Nobody told me to care. But when I saw her standing there in the freezing rain, clutching that little boy's hand like he was the only solid thing left in her world, I stopped anyway. That was the night Dominique Carrier's life split in two. Before the parking lot. After the parking lot. She wouldn't understand that for months. She'd spend those months trying to forget it ever happened, trying to go back to being the woman who worked doubles at the Maple and Pine Diner in Sudbury, Ontario, who knew all the regulars by order and never once asked for anything from anyone. The woman who believed, quietly and stubbornly, that keeping your head down was the safest way to live. She was wrong, and the man in the black Escalade was about to show her exactly how wrong. If you're new here, welcome to Ella's Romance Library, where every story starts where the world stops making sense. Go ahead and hit subscribe, and let's get into it. It was a Thursday in November, which in Sudbury means the kind of cold that doesn't ask permission. The wind off Ramsey Lake had been vicious all week, the kind that finds every gap in your jacket and settles in your bones. Dominique had worked a 9-hour shift, her feet ached through her non-slip shoes, and she had exactly $43 in tips in her apron pocket, most of it in coins. She was cutting through the north parking lot of the Cambrian Mall because it was 3 blocks shorter than the main road, and she needed every minute she could get. Her son, Benji, had a cough that had been going on for 6 days, and she'd already pushed his pediatrician appointment twice because her shifts kept running over. Tonight she'd promised herself she'd call first thing in the morning. She was mentally rehearsing that phone call, rehearsing the way she'd hold her ground if they tried to schedule it for 3 weeks out again, when she heard it. Not a scream, nothing that dramatic, just a small voice, high and clear, cutting through the wind. Maman ne répond plus. Dominique stopped. She turned. There, pressed against the concrete wall near the mall's service exit, stood a little boy. Maybe 4 years old, maybe 5, in a winter coat that was a size too small, his face wet with either rain or tears, probably both. He was holding a phone, an expensive one, cracked screen, the kind of phone a child shouldn't have. He was staring at it like it had personally betrayed him. Beside him, slumped against the wall with her back to the bricks, was a woman. Dominique's stomach dropped before her brain caught up. She crossed the lot at a near run. The woman was conscious, barely. Her eyes were half open, her breathing shallow and wrong. She was maybe 30, well-dressed, one heel broken off her left boot. There was no blood, no obvious injury. But the way she was holding herself, the way her hand had gone slack around the boy's wrist. "Hey!" Dominique crouched in front of her. "Hey, can you hear me? What's your name?" The woman's eyes tried to focus. "Mathieu," she whispered. "Just the one word, the boy." "He's right here," Dominique said, and she reached out and put her hand on the child's shoulder without thinking about it. "He's right here with me, okay? He's safe." She pulled out her own phone and called 911. While she waited, she kept her hand on Mathieu's shoulder and talked to the woman, whose name, she pieced together from the boy's frightened murmuring, was Sylvie. She talked about nothing important. She talked about the diner, about the soup special they'd had that day, about how cold it was, about how help was coming. She kept her voice steady because the boy was listening, and he needed to hear that someone in the world knew what they were doing. She did not know what she was doing, but she stayed anyway. The ambulance came in 11 minutes. By that point, a car had pulled into the north lot and parked at the far end. A black Escalade with tinted windows, idling in the dark. Dominique noticed it the way you notice something peripheral, not fully, just a flicker of awareness. Later, she would think about that flicker a great deal. The paramedics took Sylvie. One of them, a young woman with a calm efficiency that Dominique envied, crouched and spoke to Mathieu in French, very gently. He went with them without crying, which somehow made it worse. Dominique stood in the emptied lot, her hands cold, her tips still in her apron. She turned to go home. That was when she heard the car door. The man who got out of the Escalade was not what you'd call approachable. He was tall, not in a way that was comforting, in a way that was simply a fact, like weather. He wore a coat that cost more than Dominique's monthly rent, and he moved across that parking lot like he owned it, which, as she would learn later, he nearly did. His face was difficult to read in the low orange glow of the parking lot lights. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, no expression that she could identify as any particular emotion. He walked toward her without hesitation, like he'd had a destination all along, and she had been it. "You called 911, he said. Not a question. She stood her ground, though every instinct she had was paying close attention. "I did. There was a woman and a child who needed help. The woman's name was Sylvie Bolak." He said it in the past tense, and she caught that, the chill of it. "She works for me." Dominique looked at him carefully. "Is she going to be okay?" Something moved through his face. It was brief. She wouldn't have caught it if she hadn't been watching. "I don't know yet," he said. "That depends on what happened to her." "I don't know what happened to her. I found her against the wall." She was, barely conscious. The boy was. She stopped. "Is Mathieu yours?" "My nephew," he said. "My sister's son, his sister's son." Dominique looked at this man, this very expensive, very controlled, very clearly not ordinary man, and thought about a little boy standing in the freezing rain saying "Maman ne répond plus." "He's okay?" she said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. He was scared, but he was okay. He was talking to her the whole time. He didn't let go of her hand. The man was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Your name, not what's your name, just your name." "Dominique Carrier." He extended his hand. She shook it because what else do you do? His grip was brief and firm, and told her absolutely nothing except that he was not someone who wasted motion. "Lucien Marchand," he said. She did not recognize the name. This would later strike the people in his world as almost impossible. He studied her for another moment, long enough to be uncomfortable, not long enough for her to object. And then he said, "Someone will be in touch," and walked back to his car. Someone will be in touch. She stood there in the cold, watching the Escalade's taillights disappear around the corner, and thought, that was the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. She had no idea. 3 days passed. Dominique worked her shifts. She called Benji's doctor and held her ground and got him an appointment for Friday, which felt like a small victory. She didn't think much about the parking lot. She told herself it was a coincidence, the kind of thing that happens and then dissolves. A woman got sick, a child was scared. She helped. That was all. On the 4th day, a woman came into the Maple and Pine during the 7 a.m. rush. She was slim, late 40s, dressed like she'd never eaten at a diner in her life. Not snobbishly, just clearly out of habitat. She sat at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and waited until Dominique came to refill it. Then she slid a card across the counter. Cream stock. No logo, just a number. "Mr. Marchand would like to speak with you," the woman said. "At your convenience." She said "at your convenience" like she meant it, which was unusual in Dominique's experience with people who used phrases like that. "The call can be brief. He simply wants to thank you personally." Dominique looked at the card, then at the woman. "He could have done that in the parking lot," she said. The woman allowed a very small smile. "Yes," she said, "he could have." She left a 20 for the coffee and walked out. Dominique put the card in her apron pocket next to her pen. She carried it through 3 more hours of service before she took her break, went out the back and dialed. It rang once. "Mrs. Carrier." His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Contained, careful. "Mr. Marchand, my sister is going to recover," he said. "Sylvie, I wanted you to know." The relief that moved through Dominique surprised her with its force. She hadn't realized she'd been holding that. "I'm glad," she said. "What happened to her?" A pause. Not hesitation, more like consideration, like he was measuring how much to say. "She was poisoned," he said. "Something in her drink at a meeting earlier that evening. Whoever administered it was expecting her to be alone." Dominique leaned against the cold brick of the diner's back wall. "Poisoned." "Mathieu," she said. "Was he? He wasn't the target. He was collateral." The word was flat, clinical, the way you say a thing when the full weight of it is too much to carry in your voice. If he had been alone with her, she would have lost consciousness and he would have been left there, possibly for hours. Possibly for hours. In November. In Sudbury. "I was just cutting through," Dominique said, and she heard how inadequate that was, how thin. "Yes," Lucien Marchand said. "You were." Another pause. "I want to do something for you, Miss Carrier. Not as payment. Don't think of it that way. Think of it as..." He seemed to find the word slightly difficult. "Gratitude." She almost said that's not necessary. It was what she'd been raised to say. Instead, she said, "Your sister's son told her he loved her while we were waiting for the ambulance." She couldn't talk anymore, but she squeezed his hand. She said it because she'd been carrying that too, that small, fierce thing. I just wanted someone who loves her to know that. There was a silence on the line. When Lucien spoke again, something in his voice was different. Not softer, exactly. More like present. Like a door had opened 1 inch that had been closed before. I'll remember that, he said. And here's where I need you to understand something about Lucien Marchand. Because this is the part of the story where you might be tempted to write him off as a threat, as a danger Dominique should have run from, and you wouldn't be wrong to wonder. So let me tell you what kind of man he was. Lucien Marchand was 41 years old. He had run the Marchand organization out of Toronto since he was 32, when his father had died of a heart attack in the middle of a meeting nobody discusses. He had inherited a criminal empire that operated across Ontario and parts of Quebec, moving money through legitimate real estate development, construction supply chains, and 3 mid-tier restaurant groups that were exactly as good as they needed to be, and no better. He was not a violent man by temperament. He was violent when necessary, which had been often enough in the years of consolidating his father's loose and leaking empire, and not at all in the last 4. He had a code, which is not the same as having morals, but in practice is sometimes indistinguishable. He had never married. He had a daughter, Charlotte, who was 8 years old and lived with her mother in Ottawa, and who Lucien saw every 3rd weekend and spoke to every other day by phone. Charlotte collected hockey cards and had opinions about everything and called him Papa, in a voice that was the only thing in his world that cost him nothing. He had not cried at his father's funeral. He had cried, alone, in his car, driving back from Ottawa the last time he'd dropped Charlotte off, because she'd waved from the driveway until he turned the corner. He had never told anyone that. He was not a good man, but he was not a simple one. And when Dominique Carrier had told him about Mathieu squeezing his mother's hand, something in him had recognized something in her, a quality he didn't have a name for, something to do with showing up and staying and not looking for credit. He noticed it. The second time Dominique heard from someone in Lucien Marchand's world, it wasn't a woman with a card. It was 2 men outside the diner at midnight, when she was walking to her car. They weren't threatening her. That was the thing. She understood that almost immediately, in the animal way you understand things late at night in empty parking lots. They were positioned wrong for threat. One was leaning against a car, hands in pockets. The other was standing at a distance. "Mrs. Carrier," said the one leaning against the car. 30s, French-Canadian accent, the kind of deliberate politeness that takes training. "We've been asked to see you home safely tonight." She stopped. "Why?" "We've become aware that you may have been identified," he said, "by the people who targeted Ms. Bolak as a possible witness." She looked at him, then at the other one, then back. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that the people who poisoned a woman I found in a parking lot think I know something about it." "That's correct. And what do I know about it?" "Probably nothing," he said. "But they don't know that." She stood in the cold midnight air of Sudbury and thought about Benji at home with her mother, asleep, coughing in his sleep. She thought about her $43 in tips. She thought about how she'd been cutting through the lot to save 3 blocks. "Fine," she said. "But I'm driving myself," he nodded. "We'll follow." Lucien was in Sudbury by morning. Dominique found this out because he called her at 7:15, which was early for a social call and not how she'd expected the day to start. "I'm going to need to speak with you in person," he said, without preamble. "I understand if you'd prefer a public location." "The diner," she said. "I start at 9. Come at 8:30, and I'll make sure there's a table." He came at 8:25, which told her something. He sat at the table by the window, the one she'd saved, and he looked slightly wrong in it. Not uncomfortable, just too much for the space, like a piece of furniture put in the wrong room. She brought him coffee without asking. He took it black. "The people who poisoned Sylvie are looking for what she was carrying," he said. "Documents, financial records. They believe you may have taken them, or photographed them, or that Sylvie may have passed them to you before she lost consciousness." "She could barely talk," Dominique said. "I know that. She said her son's name. That was all. I know that too." He wrapped both hands around the mug, not drinking, just holding it. For a moment he looked less like a man who ran an empire and more like a man who was tired. But the people looking for those documents aren't careful thinkers. They're frightened, which is worse. And frightened people make examples. Dominique sat down across from him. She was not generally the kind of person who sat down uninvited at tables, but something about the moment required it. She sat and she looked at him and she said, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" He looked back at her. "Right now? Nothing. I'm asking you to be aware. To be careful, too." He stopped, started again. "I'm asking you to let me ensure your safety until this is resolved. And if I say no, then I'll respect that," he said. "And I'll have 2 people on you anyway, at a distance, who you won't see." He said it matter-of-factly, not as a threat. "Because you stepped in for my family, and I don't leave debts." She looked at him for a long moment. "My son is 5 years old," she said. "He has a cough that won't quit and a doctor's appointment on Friday, and he likes the maple leafs, which I blame entirely on his uncle. He doesn't know anything about parking lots or poisoned women or financial documents." "He won't," Lucienne said. The 2 words were quiet and absolutely unambiguous. She breathed out. "His appointment is at 2 o'clock Friday," she said. "Someone will drive you," he said. "Someone will drive you," again, with the someone. She was starting to understand that his world ran on people who were extensions of his intent, a small, careful infrastructure of people who appeared and vanished and made things happen. "You can drive me yourself," she said, "since you're here." He looked at her. She looked back. "All right," he said. "Now here's what the people in Lucien Marchand's world could not understand, and what his deputy, a practical man named Rémy, spent 2 weeks trying to explain to himself. Lucien Marchand drove a waitress's 5-year-old son to a pediatrician appointment in Sudbury, Ontario, on a Friday afternoon and sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes reading a hockey magazine. Rémy, when he heard, said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Was it a good appointment?" "The kid's fine. Mild bronchitis," said the man who'd reported it. Rémy nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, and left it at that. Charlotte called that Friday evening while Lucien was still in Sudbury. He took it in his rental car, parked outside the Maple and Pine, which had closed an hour ago. He could see the light still on in the back. Dominique finishing up probably, or the overnight cleaning. "Papa," Charlotte said, "did you know that Mats Sundin is the only player to score their 500th career goal as a Maple Leaf?" "I did not know that." "I knew that," she said, with satisfaction. "Are you coming next weekend?" "I'll be there," he said. "Saturday morning. I'll bring those waffles you like, from the place on Bloor." "From the place on Bloor?" "Okay," she said. And then, after a pause, in a slightly different voice, "Papa, is Aunt Sylvie okay? Maman said she was sick." He looked at the light in the back of the diner. "She's going to be okay, ma chérie," he said. "Someone helped her." "Who?" He watched the light. "A woman who was just passing by," he said. "She stopped." "Oh." Charlotte considered this. "That was nice." "Yes," Lucien said. "It was." What Dominique didn't know, what no one had told her yet, was that the financial documents Sylvie had been carrying were not just any records. They were evidence, specific, precise, carefully gathered evidence of money laundering that ran through 4 legitimate businesses and 3 levels of government contracts in northern Ontario. Sylvie Bolac, who was an accountant by training, had been building this record quietly for 8 months. Not for law enforcement, for Lucien, because the man whose name appeared most prominently in those records was a man named Gerald Okafor, a name Dominique would not know, but which Lucien's organization knew very well. And Gerald Okafor had been skimming, lying, and ultimately endangering every agreement Lucien had spent 4 years carefully maintaining. The documents were still missing, or rather, they had never been in Sylvie's bag at all. She had been smarter than that. She had sent them before the meeting. She had sent them to the one address she trusted that was completely outside Lucien's world and therefore invisible to anyone watching it. She had sent them to her own home, to her apartment on Larch Street. And the people looking for them had figured that out 48 hours after Dominique sat across from Lucien in the diner. Lucien's phone rang at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. He was still in Sudbury. He answered it, listened for 12 seconds, and was out the door in 13. Dominique got the knock at 11:45. It wasn't frightening, the knock. It was too deliberate for frightening. 3 even beats like someone making an appointment. She looked through the peephole, saw a woman, maybe 60, short gray hair, calm expression, standing in the hallway of her building. Carrier, the woman said through the door, before Dominique could speak. My name is Hélène. I work for Lucien Marchand. He's asked me to bring you somewhere safer for the night. Your mother and your son are already en route. Everyone is fine. He would like to speak to you when you arrive. Dominique stood on her side of the door. She thought about the last 3 weeks. She thought about Mathieu in the cold. She thought about a man sitting in a pediatric waiting room with a hockey magazine. She opened the door. Give me 5 minutes, she said. Of course, said Hélène. The house was outside the city, set back from a rural road she didn't know, lit warmly against the black November trees. It was large but not ostentatious. Someone had put on a kettle. Her mother was in the kitchen, handling the situation with the particular composure of a woman who had lived through enough to have categories for the uncategorizable. Benji was asleep on a couch, in a room off the hallway, his breathing easy and clear for the first time in weeks. Lucien was standing by a window. He turned when she walked in, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the quiet held something she didn't have a word for yet. Something that had been building since a parking lot, since a cracked phone screen, since 2 hands wrapped around a coffee mug. The documents are recovered, he said. Sylvie's apartment wasn't touched. Gerald Okafor's being dealt with. She nodded. And me, my son, safe, he said. As of tonight, the people looking at you have been redirected. He said it carefully, and she understood there were things in that word she didn't need specifics about. How long before it's actually over, she asked. A week, possibly 2. He paused. Possibly permanently if things go as I expect. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. Outside, the trees were bare and still. You know what I keep thinking about, she said. He waited. I keep thinking about how I almost didn't cut through that parking lot. She set out quietly, looking at the dark shapes of the trees. I was going to take the main road. I was tired and I almost didn't. She turned to look at him. What would have happened to Mathieu? He held her gaze. I don't know, he said, which she understood from him was the truest possible answer. But you would have found him, she said, eventually. The word was honest, and it cost him something to say it. She nodded. And then, because it was past midnight, and she was standing in a stranger's house that smelled like wood smoke and tea, with her son asleep in the next room, and a man she did not fully understand standing 6 inches away from her, she said the thing she'd been thinking for 3 weeks. You sat in that waiting room for 40 minutes. Benji told me about the maple leaves, he said. In some detail. She laughed. It came out small and a little broken, the way laughter does when you've been holding something tight for too long. He does that to everyone. He's a good kid, Lucien said. Simply, like a fact. She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, the November wind moved through the trees, and here's the thing about Lucien Marchand that his world never fully understood. He had built everything he had on the principle that people are transactions, that every exchange has a cost and a benefit, and you stay solvent by knowing which is which. It had been a successful principle. It had kept him alive and ahead for years. But there is a particular kind of person, rare and usually unaware of their own rarity, who operates entirely outside that math, who stops in a parking lot not because of what they'll get out of it, but because a child is standing in the rain, who sits across a table from a powerful man and asks, simply, "What do you need me to do?" Who laughs at midnight like something releasing. Lucien Marchand had never met anyone like Dominique Carrier before. He wasn't sure what to do with that. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure about something, and it didn't feel like a problem. 3 months later, Sylvie Bolac drove to Sudbury on a Tuesday, went into the Pine Diner and sat at the counter. Dominique recognized her the moment she walked in. Different from the last time she'd seen her. Clearly, upright and purposeful, her dark hair down. She looked like a woman who had decided something. Dominique brought her coffee. I wanted to meet you properly, Sylvie said, without the ambulance. Fair, Dominique said. Sylvie wrapped both hands around the mug. The same gesture Dominique noticed that Lucien had made that morning months ago, and looked at her with the clear, direct gaze of someone who has recently been close enough to death to have stopped pretending about things. "My brother," she said, "is not easy." "No," Dominique agreed. "He doesn't explain himself. He keeps things from people to protect them and then wonders why they feel excluded. He would rather fix a problem entirely than ask for help with it." Sylvie paused. "He sat in that parking lot for an hour before he got out of the car. Did you know that? He saw you with Mathieu. He was on the phone with people, managing things, and he watched you stay. For an hour." Dominique set down the coffee pot. "He watched me for an hour," she said. "He watched you stay," Sylvie said. "There's a difference." Outside, the Sudbury morning was doing what November mornings do, pale and relentless, the light thin and real. Inside the diner, the coffee was hot, and the radiator ticked, and someone at table 4 wanted more syrup. Dominique picked the coffee pot back up. "Tell your brother," she said, "that Charlotte's waffles are better at the place on Larch. And I'd know, this is a diner." Sylvie looked at her. Then she smiled. A real one, the kind that takes the whole face. "I'll tell him," she said. "The kind of people who change your life rarely announce themselves. They don't come in with warnings or credentials or the right kind of car. They come in cutting through a parking lot because it's 3 blocks shorter. They come in tired and cold and carrying a pocket full of coins. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the most unexpected thing in the world isn't the danger. It's the person who stays. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments below. And tell me, would you have stopped? On a night like that, in a parking lot like that, would you have stayed? If this story found you at the right moment, hit that like button. And if you're new here, subscribe. We've got more where this came from. I'll see you in the next one.